Dr. Ajay Sahni is an author on counterterrorism and serves as the executive director of Institute for Conflict Management in New Delhi, which maintains the South Asia Terrorism Portal, a website focusing on terrorism in South Asia. In 2006, Dr. Sahni Dr. Sahni submitted written evidence to the UK House of Commons Select Committee on Foreign Affairs regarding Islamic terrorism in South Asia, which is available on the House of Commons website. We have today Dr. Sahni with us. Welcome, Dr. Sahni, and thank you very much for giving us time for please. My first question is, while withdrawal of the U.S. forces from Afghanistan has left the country at mercy of Taliban jihadists, we are already witnessing that the Taliban jihadists are pushing Afghanistan towards dark era where rights of women and human rights are being grossly violated. Under such scenarios, my question is, what United States and its allies can do to save Afghanistan from the grips of Taliban jihadists and taking any further measures in Afghanistan. The United States may need to once again tag Pakistan as an ally, though in the past Pakistan has betrayed with the United States and used American money towards funding terrorism. In your opinion, how the US can achieve its goal in Afghanistan with an ally like Pakistan, which is already known for patronizing terrorism?
You see, I think that the United States has played out all its cards. It has no significant leverage on Afghanistan anymore. It is trying to recover leverage over Pakistan once again by trying to fund Pakistan, by giving, for instance, they have reopened military aid after 2018 for the first time. They've given them a maintenance package for the F-16s that they have supplied them. Supposedly, the F-16s are to fight terrorism. I mean, nothing could be more nonsensical. But I think this is a replay of something that the United States has done again and again and again. Even when the Pakistanis were supporting a Taliban which was crossing the border and killing American forces and NATO forces, they were still constantly trying to play Pakistan by, or rather simply tie up Pakistan. And Pakistan has taken tremendous and continuous advantage of them, and amazingly still succeeds in doing so. They are still trying to go back to Pakistan and trying to, in some sense, restore influence over Afghanistan through Pakistan. And despite the fact that Pakistan itself is losing influence on, in and over the Taliban. So I think apart from the fact that the Americans really burnt all their bridges with Afghanistan when they withdrew in the manner in which they withdrew, without any of the conditions of the Doha Accord being fulfilled by the Taliban, the simple flight from Afghanistan. Now other players are becoming far more influential. China is playing in over there, Russia is playing in over there. So will America, through its strategy of, what would you call it, strangulation through sanctions, be able to influence the Taliban? I don't think so. Despite the tremendous humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, the Taliban is not the kind of organization which will have much sympathy or care for the general population. So I don't think there is much America can do unless there is a complete reconsideration of the very foundations on which its policies over the recent past have been based.
It means that also there are recent developments that Taliban are trying to penetrate inside Pakistan and annex a part of Pakistan and turn it into a Taliban caliphate. I mean, this is the Taliban being it under the Taliban administration. So I think it's a complicated situation in Taliban, and for a country like Pakistan, which has a past record of a kind of patronizing terrorism. I also agree with you as yes, U.S. needs to reboot its policies, and really it can't greatly depend on Pakistan, right? About Iran, Dr. Sani, that in Iran, you know that anti-regime protest is continuing for now almost many months. And in your opinion, can these protesters succeed in ousting the Ayatollahs from power?
I don't really see that as a approximate possibility. You see, these are enormously violent, enormously repressive regimes. And repression works for whatever people may, the idealist may say, no, revolutions are possible, etc., etc. Revolutions are possible only when regimes are deeply degraded. The Iran regime is not degraded in that sense. It is continuing to substantially hold its administration and its forces. Yes, there have been very sustained protests, no doubt. But we've had similar and very sustained protests over months and in other theaters in the Middle East. And almost every one of them has been suppressed or completely eliminated from the political scenario. I do not think, in fact, Iran is far more stable than many of those regimes were. Certainly, you had the situation in Egypt was there, the situation in several other theaters was there. Algeria was something of a success. But I think broadly, the protests in Iran are not going to get the scale that is necessary. And as you have seen, repressive measures have intensified. They have now also announced the death penalty for participants in these protests. So gradually, I do not believe that this would be a very successful thing. And those who are encouraging these protests from the outside are doing what the West has always done, and what the West is also doing in other theaters at this juncture, which is allowing locals to be killed to serve their own whatever muddled geostrategic ends they may have.
But there is a recent development that in Iran, Iranian government is currently extending its cooperation towards Islamic State and other militancy groups. So don't you think this the Iranian issue and then Iranian regime joining hands with ISIS or Al Qaeda, it may even further complicate the situation in the Middle East and Persian Gulf?
You see, historically, what Iran has done is offered limited safe haven to some individuals connected with these groups. Some Al Qaeda leaders were there, some Islamic State leaders are now being given safe haven. But essentially, there can be no long-term ideological concert between Iran and the Islamic State, Iran and the Al Qaeda. This is a Shia state. They are by definition murtad. They are by definition apostates. They cannot have an enduring relationship with extremist Sunni groupings. So I don't think there is any possibility of Iran having a long-term strategic understanding with either the Islamic State or with Al Qaeda.
But maybe don't you think that for Iran, let's say strategically joining hands with Al Qaeda or Islamic State, which are Sunni terrorist groups, so do you think that it could be a part of Iran's broader agenda of confronting Saudi Arabia and other countries in the Middle East?
Only very marginally. As I said before, they have certainly given safe haven to some of the leaders in the past and are likely to continue to do this in future as well. But I don't think that they will get into too deep an entanglement or can get into too deep an entanglement with either of these groups.
Now, I'd like to come to India because you are a counterterrorism specialist, globally acclaimed. So in India, there is a rise of radical Islamic militancy in many parts of the country. And we are aware of the activities of Al Qaeda, AQIS and ISIS in India. So do you think for a country like India, these kind of jihadist groups in Tamil Nadu or West Bengal and other parts of India. Do you think these groups may pose certain degree of threat to India's national security?
You see, if you see the trends in terrorism in India, all patterns of terrorism, and particularly Islamist terrorism, including terrorism in Jammu, Pakistan-backed terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir, they have radically declined. I will just give you one figure. The peak of fatalities in Jammu and Kashmir, for instance, was 4,500 plus in 2001. We are now seeing something like 200 odd fatalities, 250 fatalities, 300 fatalities, a maximum of 400 fatalities, I think, in 2018. So we've really come down to a very small fraction of what was ongoing. Outside Jammu and Kashmir, there is barely an incident or two, very minor incidents, usually of terrorists being killed, or terrorists very often blowing themselves up while trying to mix in, explosives. So the actual threat of terrorism today is of Islamist terrorism today has been marginalized across the country, very definitely, and has been dramatically reduced, even in Jammu and Kashmir, where you are seeing a continuous flow of aid, assistance, weapons droppings by drones, money transfers, everything is being attempted. But shall we say, intensity or trajectory of terrorism is certainly declining very, very dramatically. These groups have been all, for instance, you have, Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, as you mentioned. Now, let me tell you that Al-Qaeda has been trying to get into India since 1996. That is when Osama bin Laden made the first call for a jihad in India. Now, between 1996 and the present, Al-Qaeda has not been able to engineer outside Jammu and Kashmir a single incident, apart from a minor train bombing in which I think a dozen people were injured. As far as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, you hear the odd incident by the Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent. Most of the leaders of this grouping, and the grouping has never had more than a dozen or a score of members. And most of the leaders of this grouping are very quickly eliminated or arrested, and they may place some little, you might say, low-level frisson of activity continues. But they do not constitute anything. No global Islamist group has been able to establish a foothold in any part of India, though occasional activities of some groupings may have been noticed. The groups that are a danger to India continue to be the same ones: the Islamic, the ISI-sponsored groupings, the Pakistani state-sponsored groupings, including purely Pakistani groupings like the Jaish-e-Mohammed or the Lashkar-e-Taiba or others of Harkatul Mujahideen, some surviving elements of the Hizbul Mujahideen, which is a mixed group of Indian Kashmiri and non-Kashmiri elements. So all of these are headquartered in Pakistan, different parts of Pakistan, and operate from Pakistan with the assistance, active and visible assistance of the Pakistani state. But on the ground, what we have seen is that the Indian state forces have established a very substantial dominance, have brought down the intensity of the conflict there from what was for almost 17 years a high-intensity conflict, more than 1,000 fatalities a year, to the current situation where we see 200, 300 fatalities a year with limited fluctuations. Sometimes it goes a little up and sometimes it comes a little down. But that's roughly where we are right now. So neither the international groupings nor indeed now the Pakistan-backed groupings have the kind of, the international groupings have never been able to establish any kind of impact. And the Pakistan-backed groupings are also now increasingly declining in their capacities to operate.
So in this case, as you just now mentioned, that the Islamic militancy groups were not able to establish its foothold in India. And we know that by and large, India is a country of religious harmony, interfaith harmony, everything. So in this case, I mean, this seems, as you say, that the the density of the Islamic militancy has been greatly, substantially contained in India. And we know there is a government in India under Prime Minister Narendra Modi from 2014. Do you or can we give credit to the present government for this achievement, which has resulted in decline in the activities of the jihadist groups and Islamic militancy groups and Pakistani patronized terrorist groups in India?
No, I don't think so. You see, these trends had been established well before this government came into power. If you look at Jammu and Kashmir, for instance, in 2012, total fatalities, according to our data, had already come down to as little as 121 in Jammu and Kashmir. According to government data, they came down below 100, right down to 99. So we were at a much lower level. And after this government has come into power, if anything, there has been a local escalation, a slight escalation from the lowest figure of 121 that we record. So this is certainly not something this government has engineered. If anything, this government, through its polarizing politics, through its communalized politics, may have revived a certain degree of resentment in the populations, which may have fed the militancy to a certain extent. Moreover, I don't think any of they have actually completely made politics impossible in Jammu and Kashmir. So while we were at a stage where I think the fatalities or the violence levels had come down to a point where a political initiative could have secured a far greater consolidation, security forces alone cannot end an insurgency or a terrorist movement. They can contain it. But at the end of the day, the resolution has to come through the administration, and it has to come through a outreach of the administration to the affected area. That means Jammu and Kashmir. Instead of such an outreach, what we have seen actually are deeply disruptive interventions. Article 370, for instance, the move on Article 370, and what they did after Article 370, which is completely marginalize or neutralize all local political groupings. Now you have to have political groupings to resolve an issue in the end. If you do not have if you want a political outreach from the center to Jammu and Kashmir, it must be to a political leadership in Jammu and Kashmir, not to your own proxies there. And your own proxies over there have not been able to generate even the slightest credible support base. Apart from the fact that everyone who is put up immediately becomes a target for whatever remains of the terrorist movement. So there is also the fear factor. So I don't think the government has done anything dramatically positive. And if there has been a tremendous consolidation of the forces on the ground, that is because of the build-up. Gradually, you see the trend in terrorism was continuously declining from 2000, a peak in 2001. And then slowly and gradually, continuously downwards, right to 2012. And then again, we start seeing gradual increases. Similarly, if you see terrorism outside Jammu and Kashmir, Islamist terrorism outside Jammu and Kashmir, the peak was in 2008. After that, you have seen a dramatic decline, and now you have the ones and twos in terms of incidents. And many of these incidents in the recent past have been these, what they call self-radicalized individuals who go out, they have no linkages, no significant connections. They go out, they kill one person or kill two people, and that is the end of their careers and their lives also. So these are not, every such death is a tragedy. That is not to be sort of denied. But these do not constitute national security issues. So again, post 2008, we see a continuous decline, and it is not that this government has done anything radical. So the consolidation under this government, to the degree that it has occurred as a result of the operation of the security forces, who have continued to do what they were doing. What the government has done is actually, in substantial measure, inject a measure of destabilization rather than of greater stabilization.
We'd like to focus on the another issue about the Tablighi Jamaat. In my opinion, Tablighi Jamaat is the vessel of jihadist recruitment. Saudi Arabia has recently banned Tablighi Jamaat, but Tablighis are active in Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and in the subcontinent. Do you see Tablighis as a threat to the regional securities? And if it is so, that what measures our governments can initiate to check this organization?
You see, this is where we come into extremely gray areas. Uh, uh, Constantly, one has reiterated, as far as Tablighi Jamaat is in India is concerned, that they have not at any stage endorsed terrorism, or have we seen members of the current members of Tablighi Jamaat engaging in terrorism.
But in the past,
So we have to find out. Yes, please. Just let me finish the point.
Yeah.
That the difficulty is that almost all extremely conservative religious organizations tend to be only a hair's breadth away from radical and violent terrorist groupings. The minute you are preaching a supremacist or an exclusive religious faith, you are already treading dangerous ground. Now, the question is that in democracies, do we have the right to ban such advocacy, which would require you to ban a great deal of religious activity, and that can also become a instrumentality of the oppression of the state, where religious freedoms are being denied. So this is a very difficult question to answer. Do I think that the Tablighi Jamaat is a problem? Absolutely. But I also think that many other religious organizations are a problem. Now, the choice is to begin to be more and more indiscriminate in our action against religious organizations, or accept that there will be a certain degree of difficulty in dealing. You see, similarly, you're talking about the Tablighi Jamaat. You could take the Darul Uloom Deoband. Now, across the world, Deobandis are supposed to be the source of so much difficulty.
Yeah.
But many people who were Tablighi did go on to become terrorists. Many people who have come from Deobandi, from Darul Uloom Deoband, did go on to become terrorists. But nobody, Deoband and Tablighi Jamaat Hind, have both condemned terrorism. So we have to ask very, very, I think, pointed questions. Understand that we as democracies will have to accept certain risks that arise out of the advocacy of permitted ideologies. Religious ideologies are permitted ideologies. I have problems with almost all religious ideologies. I mean, there is Christian extremism, there is Hindu extremism, there is Buddhist extremism. Now, how many of these groupings are we to act against? So we have to wait till there is a crossing of the Rubicon, so to speak, when their speech ceases to be advocacy, where it ceases to be religious sermonizing and becomes incitement. Incitement to offense, incitement to terrorism, incitement to violence, incitement to hatred of the other group. When they cross that line, then you have to act against them. And wherever they cross that line, I think action is now slowly being taken. Some countries have recognized the linkages between extremist action and the Tabligh. When we see that in India, I think we will also begin to take action. And I think you are seeing some of these difficulties emerging in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
So where you see this emerging, you have taken action against so many other groups. Jamaat-e-Islami is, of course, it was a banned group in Bangladesh for a long time after War of Independence. But now it is no longer a banned group, but it is developing linkages with terrorist organizations, as a result of which you have arrested the head of the Jamaat-e-Islami. So these things cannot be decided at a stroke. They must be decided in terms of current and local action by these groupings. If the Tablighi Jamaat in the UK has been found to be funding terrorist activities, UK will take action against them. If Tablighi Jamaat Bangladesh begins to create difficulties in terms of actual activity, not create generic difficulties, increasing fundamentalization, fanaticism. Unfortunately, we are all permitted to be fanatics. There is no ban against fanaticism. The ban is against acting against others on the basis of fanaticism. So when that line is crossed, certainly we should take action against any grouping, not specifically the Tablighi Jamaat, but any grouping that crosses that line.
We would like to ask the last question to you. And of course, we know that you are very much focusing on the terrorism and other issues related to also global peace, etc. So, since 2009, a secularist government is in power in Bangladesh under the leadership of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, and this government has been vigorously confronting terrorism and religious extremism. Sheikh Hasina has combated those insurgency groups which were active in India, and using Bangladesh soil, those has been uprooted by Sheikh Hasina's government. Now, in 2024, next year, Bangladesh will be holding another general election where Islamists, as you mentioned, Jamaat Islami, Islamists, Bangladesh Nationalist Party, Islamists, they are trying to come to power. In the recent time, it is seen that Islamists in Bangladesh are unfortunately getting support or sympathy from the Western countries, particularly the US Biden administration. Do you think for a Muslim majority country like Bangladesh with 180 million population, any Islamist government is pose serious threat to the region and also to India?
First, I'd like to sort of underline very strongly, I have written about this again and again. I think what Sheikh Hasina's government has done in the last 10 years is a virtual miracle. I do not see comparable turnaround in any other country. I do remember, perhaps a little fanciful, but in early 2000s, I think 2002 or 2003, somebody in India had written a book titled Bangladesh, the Next Afghanistan. I disagreed with that even then. But at a certain level, the perception was that Bangladesh was really on the cusp of, a Islamist takeover, that terrorism would, the fleeing terrorists from Afghanistan were all going to collect in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is going to come to an explosive situation. But Sheikh Hasina and her government has done a tremendous job in suppressing these groupings, in dismantling them. Some very low level, to the extent that now we find that they are finding it safer to, move into India rather than operate in Bangladesh. So there, some of these groups and their leaders have moved, tried to cross the border, have been arrested in India. Others are presumably hiding somewhere in India also. So I think that's a tremendous achievement on her part. I think it would be the gravest tragedy if an Islamist government of any hue comes into power into Bangladesh. Sheikh Hasina, whatever there may be legitimate criticisms of her rule, but she has also engineered one of the greatest economic recoveries as far as Bangladesh is concerned. So it's not just a question that a Islamist government in Bangladesh would constitute a threat to the region and to India. It would constitute a threat to the well-being of Bangladesh itself. The gains of the past, 10, 11 years are at risk. Now, you must also understand the mischief of Western countries who have for a long time been, trying to interfere with the Sheikh Hasina government, trying to interfere with the war crimes trials. Many of these elements are there. You have to recognize that terrorism, extremism, Islamism, extremist Islamism, all these are actually instrumentalities of subversion. They are instrumentalities that are being exploited by many powers across the world, including the West from time to time, to subvert the sovereignty of countries. And that is what is being attempted against Bangladesh today. There is a stable government. There is a government that has done well for itself, done well for the people of Bangladesh, far better than most of the other South Asian countries. And this is the government they are trying to destabilize. Why? Because they seek once again to create a neo-colonial kind of control. Weak, disruptive, and unstable governments are always what the West desires in all these regions. Because that is what gives them the leverage, that is what gives them the control, and that is what gives them access to resources and whatever other advantages they seek. So I'm very, very clear on this. It would be a disaster. And I don't know how the elections are going to go. But if one of these groupings comes into power, or a collectivity, which is what is being sought to be engineered, if a collectivity of these groups comes into power in Bangladesh, I think the gravest tragedy will be for Bangladesh itself. As for the others, I am sure each country will have to manage on its own. Some overflows will be there, but the gravest damage will be to Bangladesh itself.
We have reached to the last moment of our interview, and thank you very much for your valued time. And we both hope that Islamists will not succeed in coming to power in Bangladesh. We definitely a secular government like that of Sheikh Hasina in this country for Bangladesh prosperity and for the peace and also for the regional security. Thank you very much, Dr. Ajai Sahni, for giving us your time, and we will again be coming back to you with more interview in the future.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Chairman.